Rustbrook didn't sleep like cities used to. It waited. Silas sat alone on the cot in the cabin they'd given him, listening to the village breathe through thin walls, boots on dirt, low voices, a hammer striking metal somewhere in the dark. He could feel their eyes on him even when he couldn't see them. Out in the lane, 2 villagers stood near a barrel fire, silhouettes flickering in orange light. He heard them before he saw them. "That's him," one voice said quietly. "The drifter. The one from the elders' hall. The one Trapper vouched for." A pause. The fire crackled. "You saw his face." "Yeah. Like he's already dead and doesn't care." Another pause. "They say he came from White City." Silas didn't move. He kept his posture loose. Hands open. Breathing steady. But every word landed. The second voice snorted. "No one comes from White City. Not alive." He did. Or he's lying. Silas watched the thin curtain shift with wind. The first voice lowered. "I heard Miriam gave him a place." "She shouldn't have." A third person joined them, heavier steps, a deeper voice. "Burke." Silas recognized him even without seeing his face. That kind of suspicion had weight. "You're all thinking the same thing," Burke said. "Say it." Silence. Then the first villager spoke again. "If Fraction X comes here." Burke didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was colder. "They will come here. Because men like that don't run alone. They run with consequences tied to their boots." Silas heard a cup clink against metal. Someone swallowed hard. He looked rough, the second villager offered, as if that softened the fear. "Bruised. Like they nearly killed him." Burke's response was immediate. "They should have finished it." The word sat there, ugly and honest. Silas closed his eyes for a second. Not because it hurt. Because Burke wasn't wrong. A long pause passed before Burke continued. "We've survived by being small," Burke said. "By being quiet. By staying off maps. Off minds." He stepped closer to the fire. The heat hissed. "Now we've put a story in our gate," he went on. "White City. Fraction X stolen supplies. A man who can't tell us what he really is." A softer voice, maybe the first villager, asked, "So what do we do?" Burke exhaled through his nose. "We prepare." "For war," someone whispered. Burke didn't deny it. "For burning. Because if they come, they won't just take food. They'll take people." Silas sat perfectly still. He wanted to stand up and walk out there and say, "I didn't choose this." Or maybe, "I'm the reason you're alive." But neither sentence was truth enough to matter. He listened as the voices drifted away, boots crunching in the dirt, the barrel fire popping. And for the first time since Rustbrook let him through its gate, Silas felt the village's trust like a thin plank over a deep drop. It held. For now. But one hard step, and it would snap.
The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the cabin, casting a soft glow on Silas's worn face. He stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the night before. The respite had been brief but necessary. He knew today would bring new challenges. Silas made his way to the central meeting hall, where he found Elder Miriam already engaged in conversation with a few villagers. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, giving her an almost ethereal presence. She noticed him approaching and excused herself from the group. "Silas," she greeted, her voice steady and composed. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Silas replied, cutting straight to the point. "We need to retrieve the jeep and the supplies before someone else finds them." Miriam's brow furrowed slightly. "Is it truly that urgent? We've only just begun preparations here." "It is," Silas insisted, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "The jeep is loaded with ammunition and other supplies that could make a significant difference in our defenses. If it falls into the wrong hands..." Miriam nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Where did you leave it? In a thicket near Rustbrook's outskirts, Silas explained. Hidden under brush, but it won't stay hidden forever. She turned to one of the villagers nearby, a burly man with a stern expression. Gather a small team. We'll retrieve the jeep and its contents. The man nodded and hurried off to assemble a group. Miriam turned back to Silas, her eyes sharp with determination. I'll need 4 men. Trapper for recon, 2 guards to cover our flanks, and 1 on overwatch. Miriam glanced at Trapper. You willing? Trapper chuckled, a rough sound that echoed in the quiet hall. I'd like to see how much trouble Silas has gotten himself into this time. Count me in. Miriam turned to the other elders, her gaze sharp and decisive. A brief, silent agreement passed between them. She then addressed Silas again, her tone firm. Take Reed and 3 from the watchtower rotation. Keep it quiet. Silas nodded, appreciating her swift decision-making. He looked over at Trapper, who gave a quick nod, already mentally preparing for the task ahead. We leave now, Silas stated, his voice brooking no argument. Trapper and Silas exited the hall, their boots crunching softly on the dirt path as they headed toward the watchtower. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and impending rain. At the base of the tower, 3 guards stood at attention. Trapper grinned at them all. All right then, let's see if we can keep Silas out of trouble for once. They set off through the village gates with practiced ease, each member falling into their role seamlessly. The landscape around Rustbrook quickly shifted from cultivated plots to wild scrubland as they made their way toward the hidden jeep. Doyle takes overwatch, Silas said, nodding toward the hill crest just outside the perimeter. Briggs, you're on my left flank, Lex on the right. Trapper, you scout ahead, keep your eyes peeled for patrols. We stick to comms and stay spread out. Lex gave a sharp nod, adjusting her knife belt. Understood. Without wasting a moment, Doyle moved toward the hill crest. His heavy repeater slung over his shoulder, he climbed with practiced ease until he found a vantage point that allowed him to oversee their position and the surrounding area. From there, he settled in, eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Briggs took his position on Silas's left flank, his movements quick and efficient. He kept his rifle at the ready, eyes darting from side to side as he moved. The tension in his posture betrayed his readiness for any sudden threat. Lex slid into position on Silas's right flank. Silas smirked but stayed silent, his eyes flicking between his team. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of walkie-talkies, scavenged from the village stockpile. He distributed them, each member taking one with a nod of understanding. Stay quiet unless you have eyes on something, Silas instructed, his voice a whisper carried by the wind. Briggs secured his walkie-talkie to his belt and checked his rifle's magazine. Copy that. Lex tested her walkie-talkie's volume, ensuring it was low enough not to give away their position. She then settled into her stance, knife at the ready. Trapper gave Silas a nod before moving ahead, his steps almost silent on the rough terrain. His eyes scanned the scrubland, searching for any signs of movement or danger. Silas took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This mission had to go smoothly, Rustbrook depended on it. He glanced back at Briggs and Lex, making sure they were ready before moving forward. The team moved in unison, each step calculated and careful. The silence between them was heavy but necessary, they all knew what was at stake. Doyle's figure was barely visible on the hill crest, but Silas could see the glint of his repeater in the dim light. Trapper signaled from up ahead, indicating that the path was clear. Silas motioned for Briggs and Lex to follow as he moved toward Trapper's position. As they approached the hidden jeep, Silas felt a sense of relief wash over him. The vehicle remained untouched and well concealed under the thick brush. All right, he murmured to Trapper as they reached the jeep. Let's get this done quickly. Briggs and Lex took their positions on either side of the jeep, keeping watch while Trapper and Silas began to clear away the brush. The air was tense with anticipation, each rustle of leaves or snap of twigs setting their nerves on edge. Silas worked efficiently alongside Trapper, both men understanding the urgency of their task. As they worked in unison to prepare for their return journey, Silas couldn't help but feel a brief flicker of hope. The mission was progressing smoothly so far, if they could just keep it that way until they were safely back within Rustbrook's walls. The engine sputtered, then roared softly to life beneath his hand. "Good to go," Silas whispered into the walkie. Briggs glanced over his shoulder, giving a curt nod before returning his gaze to their surroundings. Lex shifted slightly, muscles tensing as she remained poised to react at a moment's notice. Trapper moved closer, still scanning the horizon. As they finished securing everything and prepared for their return journey, Silas couldn't shake a growing sense of urgency. He knew time was against them. Every second spent out here increased their risk of being discovered by Fraction X patrols or worse. The engine's low rumble filled Silas's ears as they began their journey back towards Rustbrook, ever watchful for any signs of trouble along their path. Doyle's voice crackled over the comms. "Silas, you've got movement. Small patrol coming in from the west. 4 men, Fraction X markings." Silas's jaw tightened. The timing couldn't be worse. "Hold position," he ordered. "Let them pass." Trapper's voice followed, laced with tension. "They're cutting too close. We might need to hit first." Silas exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as the faint shapes of the patrol crept into view along the ridgeline. The jeep could mean salvation or disaster, depending on what happened next. "Doyle, keep them in your sights," Silas said softly. "Nobody fires unless I give the word." The Wasteland held its breath as the patrol drew closer. Briggs shifted slightly, his finger resting near the trigger of his rifle. Lex's eyes flickered towards Silas, waiting for any sign to act. Trapper remained still, his sharp gaze fixed on the approaching figures. The patrol moved cautiously, scanning the terrain as they walked. They were close enough now that Silas could make out their gear, standard issue for Fraction X scouts. Mismatched armor and weapons likely scavenged from past raids. One of the patrol members paused, turning his head slightly as if he sensed something was off. Silas held his breath, willing himself to remain motionless. Doyle's voice came through again, barely a whisper. "They're stopping." Silas glanced towards Trapper, whose eyes met his with a silent question. "Do we engage?" He weighed their options quickly. If they attacked now, they risked alerting any other nearby patrols. But if they let these scouts get too close, "Stay ready," Silas murmured into the comms. The patrol continued to inch forward, their leader raising a hand to signal a halt. They were dangerously close to Doyle's position on the ridge now. "Do we take them?" Trapper's voice was tense but controlled. Silas hesitated for a fraction of a second longer before making his decision. "Only if they spot us," he replied quietly. Time seemed to stretch as the patrol scanned their surroundings one last time. Silas could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as he waited for what felt like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, the patrol leader motioned for his men to move on. The tension began to ebb slightly as they resumed their path westward, oblivious to how close they had come to danger. Silas let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding and spoke into the comms again. "Regroup at my position," he instructed quietly. One by one, his team emerged from their hiding spots and made their way back to him with practiced stealth. "That was too close," Lex muttered as she rejoined the group. "Yeah," Silas agreed grimly. Silas and his team moved with a renewed sense of urgency. They loaded the last of the supplies into the jeep and checked their surroundings one final time. Satisfied that the patrol was truly gone, Silas gave the signal to mount up. Briggs took point as the jeep roared to life, its engine a low growl against the backdrop of the wasteland. Lex settled in beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. Trapper and Doyle took up positions in the back, weapons at the ready. Silas gripped the wheel, focusing on getting them back to Rustbrook without incident. The journey back was tense but uneventful. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Silas navigated the rough terrain with practiced skill, his mind already on the next steps once they reached safety. As they neared Rustbrook, Silas spotted movement along the fortified perimeter. The villagers were already on high alert, having been warned of potential danger by Miriam and the elders. The makeshift gates creaked open as they approached, and familiar faces emerged from behind cover. Miriam stood at the entrance, her stern expression softening as she saw them return safely. "You made it," she called out, relief evident in her voice. Silas brought the jeep to a halt inside the gates and killed the engine. "All clear," he said as he stepped out, helping unload the supplies. Villagers quickly gathered around, eager to assist and see what had been brought back. Burke and Jax appeared from within the crowd, their eyes widening at the sight of the cache of weapons and supplies. "You did good," Burke said, clapping Silas on the shoulder. "We all did," Silas replied, glancing at his team with a nod of acknowledgement. The atmosphere shifted from tense anticipation to cautious optimism as crates were opened and supplies distributed. The villagers' weary faces brightened with hope. Every piece of equipment meant another layer of defense against whatever threats loomed beyond their walls. Miriam approached Silas with a rare smile. "This will make a big difference," she said softly. "Glad to hear it," Silas replied, his own expression easing for a moment. As night fell over Rustbrook, fires were lit and preparations continued. The village was far from safe, but tonight they had won a small victory. Silas watched as his team integrated back into their roles within the community. Briggs helping fortify defenses, Lex discussing strategies with Miriam, Trapper sharing intel with other scouts. For now, Rustbrook stood stronger than before, its people united by purpose and determination. In the dimly lit encampment of Fraction X, the air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and the low murmurs of wounded soldiers. The aftermath of Silas Kane's escape left a palpable tension among the ranks. Makeshift tents lined the perimeter, each one housing those who bore the marks of the recent conflict. Lieutenant Garrett stood at the center of the camp, his face a grim mask of determination. He barked orders to medics and soldiers alike, ensuring every effort was made to heal and regroup. The camp's usual order had given way to a frenetic energy as they worked to tend to their wounded. Eric lay on a cot, his face twisted in pain as a medic cleaned and bandaged his wounds. His encounter with Silas had left him battered and seething with anger. "I should have killed him when I had the chance," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Save your strength," the medic replied without looking up. "You'll need it." Nearby, Orianthe moved through the camp with a quiet efficiency, her presence commanding respect. She stopped at Eric's side, her eyes narrowing as she took in his condition. "You underestimated him," she stated bluntly. Eric glared at her but said nothing. The truth of her words stung more than his injuries. Orianthe turned her attention to Garrett, who was coordinating efforts with an intensity that spoke volumes about his frustration. "We need to reassess our security protocols," she said as she approached him. "Silas's escape is a clear indication we have weaknesses," Garrett nodded curtly. "Agreed, but first, we need to get our people back on their feet." In one of the larger tents, several soldiers lay in various states of recovery. Conversations were hushed but filled with resolve. They spoke of Silas not with fear but with a grudging respect for his cunning and resilience. "We can't let this happen again," one soldier said, his voice barely above a whisper. Another nodded, wincing as he adjusted his bandages. "Next time, we'll be ready." Orianthe moved from cot to cot, offering words of encouragement and assessing each soldier's condition with a practiced eye. Her leadership was unwavering even in this moment of vulnerability. As night settled over the encampment, the work continued without pause. The wounded were tended to, plans were revised, and a collective resolve began to take shape among Fraction X's ranks. Silas Kane had slipped through their fingers this time, but they were determined it would not happen again.
Orianthe stayed awake after the camp quieted. Fraction X slept in shifts, like predators. Even wounded men learned to rest with one ear open. She walked the perimeter alone, boots sinking slightly into packed dust, the air smelling of antiseptic and old smoke. They'd built their tents fast. Efficient. Ugly. Like everything else in the wasteland. Inside the command tent, Garrett's voice had stopped hours ago. That meant one of two things. He was planning. Or he was trying not to break something. Orianthe stopped beside a supply crate and watched the horizon. Out there, beyond the black line where the wasteland swallowed light, Rustbrook sat somewhere like a rumor. And Silas Kane was breathing. That truth irritated the camp the way a splinter irritated skin, small, constant, impossible to ignore. Eric had tried to joke about it earlier. I should have killed him. He wasn't joking. Orianthe had looked at Eric's bandaged throat and felt nothing resembling sympathy. Not because she was cruel. Because she'd seen this type of man her whole life. Men who wanted violence to do their thinking for them. Men who would ruin a resource and call it strength. She heard footsteps behind her, 2 soldiers, low voices. "We'll catch him," one said. "Garrett won't stop until he does." A pause. "And when we do, I heard Marcus wants to string him up. Make an example." Orianthe turned her head slightly. The men didn't see her in the dark. The first soldier laughed softly. "Good. He embarrassed us." The second one lowered his voice. "You think he really came from White City?" Silence. "Then, doesn't matter. Here's a problem." Orianthe stepped out of the shadows. Both men jolted. Their hands moved reflexively toward weapons. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Problems, she said evenly, are solved with information. Not tantrums. The soldiers straightened. "Lieutenant." "Don't," she cut in. "Calm. Surgical." They froze. Orianthe held their gaze for a long moment, then looked past them toward the tents. "You want to kill him because it's easier than understanding him," she said. "That's what weak men do." One soldier's jaw clenched. "He escaped." "He hurt Eric." "He escaped," Orianthe repeated softly. "From Fraction X." Her eyes narrowed. "Do you understand what kind of man does that?" Neither answered. Orianthe stepped closer, voice dropping. "A man like Kane doesn't survive by luck. He survives because he sees moves before they happen." She straightened. "And if he came from White City's direction, then he's carrying something we don't have." The soldiers looked uncertain now, fear leaking through confidence. Orianthe felt it too, but she didn't show it. She dismissed them with a flick of her hand. They left quickly, boots retreating into darkness. Orianthe remained on the perimeter. Wind tugged at her braid. In the far distance, faint on the horizon, White City's pale glow stained the night. She stared at it until her eyes hurt. Not because she feared the city. Because she feared what Garrett would do when he finally reached it. And what the city would do back. She turned away from the glow and walked toward Garrett's tent. There were rules in Fraction X. But rules weren't the real power. Power was what you could prevent. And tonight, Orianthe decided something quietly, decisively. If Garrett turned this into slaughter, she would stop him. Even if it meant becoming a traitor in her own camp.